Imagine American television without MASH. It's difficult to picture, isn't it? The series was more than a hit. It completely changed what a television sitcom could accomplish. When it premiered in 1972, while the Vietnam War was still unfolding, MASH transported viewers to the Korean War and combined comedy with powerful moments of pain and emotion. Its unforgettable characters explored the absurdity of war while revealing the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Audiences quickly embraced the show. Yet behind the laughter, MASH was constantly changing. As the series became more focused on social issues and increasingly complex character stories, disagreements began to emerge. Several major stars eventually decided to leave. Some departures were driven by career ambitions, others by creative differences or personal struggles. And in several cases, the real reasons were far more complicated than viewers realized. There is a fascinating story behind how MASH came to television, so before examining the cast departures, it helps to go back to the beginning. Like many legendary television productions, MASH actually began as a book rather than a TV show. In 1968, Dr. Richard Hooker, the pen name of Korean war surgeon H. Richard Hornberger, published MASH, a novel about 3 army doctors. The book was a fictionalized version of his experiences working as a doctor in a mobile army surgical hospital during the Korean War. Its combination of dark humor, human warmth, and the harsh realities of war quickly attracted readers and eventually caught Hollywood's attention. 2 years later, director Robert Altman transformed the novel into the film MASH. The movie was a satirical black comedy that managed to be irreverent while still showing the disturbing realities of war. Donald Sutherland played Hawkeye Pierce, while Elliot Gould portrayed Trapper John. The film connected strongly with audiences, particularly because the Vietnam War was dominating the American public consciousness. It became both a critical and commercial success, winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes as well as an Academy Award for Best Screenplay. However, the biggest cultural impact came 2 years later when CBS turned the concept into a weekly television series. Larry Gelbart and Gene Reynolds developed the television adaptation, which premiered on September 17, 1972. The series maintained the Korean War setting and unconventional humor of the movie, but developed a more serialized approach that allowed the characters to become deeper and more emotionally complex. Alan Alda took over the role of Hawkeye Pierce and quickly became the emotional center of the series. The first season struggled with ratings and came dangerously close to cancellation, but CBS decided to move the show to Saturday nights. That decision changed everything. Ratings climbed, and the cultural influence of MASH grew rapidly. The series also challenged many traditional television conventions. It experimented with its format, incorporated real war footage, and became one of the first American comedies to regularly use helicopter sounds instead of relying on a traditional laugh track. Alan Alda eventually became much more than the star playing Hawkeye. He also became a writer, director, and major creative influence, encouraging the show to pursue greater realism and emotional depth. As MASH developed, its characters evolved as well. However, not every actor was comfortable with the direction the series was taking. Some believed their characters were receiving less attention or becoming repetitive versions of themselves. Others were dealing with personal difficulties or wanted to explore different creative opportunities. Across its 11-season run, MASH experienced numerous cast changes, but its central purpose remained the same: to portray the human cost of war through compassion, humor, and the strength of relationships. That brings us to the first major departure, a decision so dramatic that the writers permanently killed off the character, leaving viewers across America stunned. For long-time MASH viewers, one of the most unforgettable moments came at the end of Season 3 in the episode, Abyssinia, Henry. Radar quietly delivered a devastating message. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's plane had been shot down over the Sea of Japan, and there were no survivors. The scene was shocking not only because of the character's death, but because it represented the first major departure of one of the show's core cast members, McLean Stevenson. Stevenson had been part of MASH from the beginning. As Colonel Henry Blake, the often confused but good-hearted commanding officer of the 4077th, he provided a human contrast to the chaos surrounding him. Hawkeye and Trapper were rebellious and sarcastic, while Henry brought a more compassionate and sometimes overwhelmed perspective. During the early seasons, Stevenson received widespread praise for the role and even earned a Golden Globe. Audiences found him funny, relatable, and deeply likable. Behind the scenes, however, Stevenson was becoming increasingly dissatisfied. According to interviews and accounts from people associated with the show, he felt his role was becoming less important as the series increasingly centered on Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. Alda was also becoming more involved in the writing and directing, which gave Hawkeye greater emotional and narrative importance. Stevenson felt pushed into the background. In a 1975 interview with People magazine, he expressed his ambition clearly, saying he wanted to be number one and the person carrying the show. Although that might sound like pure ego, his motivation was more complicated. Stevenson had major ambitions and wanted to become a leading television star rather than remain locked into a supporting role. He believed he had the talent and personality to headline a series of his own. He wanted opportunities where he would not constantly be the second or third most important performer. He wanted to lead. At the end of Season 3, Stevenson informed the producers that he would not return. Normally, when a sitcom actor leaves, the character is given a relatively comfortable exit, perhaps transferred to another location, reassigned, or sent home. But MASH was not interested in giving Henry Blake an ordinary farewell. The creators saw Stevenson's departure as an opportunity to reinforce one of the show's most important themes. MASH was ultimately a story about war, and in war, not everyone survives or gets to return home. That decision produced the legendary Abyssinia, Henry episode. Henry Blake receives his discharge papers and prepares to return home. The episode is filled with celebration, hugs, tears, and emotional goodbyes. For most of the episode, everything seems to be leading toward a happy ending. Radar enters the operating room with his hat in his hands and a serious expression on his face. While the doctors continue operating, he delivers the devastating news that Henry Blake's plane has been shot down over the Sea of Japan and that there were no survivors. What followed was an almost unbearable silence. There was no dramatic music, no laugh track, and no helicopter sound. There were only stunned expressions and the steady sounds of medical equipment. The scene became a landmark moment in television history. A beloved sitcom character had been killed permanently and without warning. Even some of the actors were genuinely shocked. Only a small number of people knew what was going to happen. Alan Alda later explained that Gary Burghoff, who played Radar, was the only actor specifically informed beforehand so he could prepare for the scene. The emotional reactions from the rest of the cast were largely genuine. Once the episode aired, the response was immediate. CBS received thousands of letters. Many viewers praised the show for being honest about the realities of war, while others were furious that such a beloved character had been taken away so suddenly. Some believed the writers had gone too far. Larry Gelbart defended the decision by explaining that the show wanted to make the point that not everyone gets to go home. For Stevenson, however, leaving MASH did not lead to the success he had hoped for. At first, things appeared promising. He signed a lucrative agreement with NBC and attempted to establish himself as the star of his own series. He eventually led the McLean Stevenson Show, a family sitcom designed around his friendly, approachable personality. Unfortunately, the series lasted only one season. His next major attempt, Hello, Larry, performed even worse. Despite significant promotion and high expectations, the show received poor reviews and eventually became something of a running joke. Looking back, Stevenson eventually admitted that leaving MASH had been a mistake. In a 1983 interview with the Los Angeles Times, he said that he had taken himself out of the game. The problem was not simply that his later shows failed. He gradually realized that MASH had been a once-in-a-lifetime experience. The cast, writing, cultural influence, and chemistry had created something that was almost impossible to reproduce. Some of his former co-stars, including Alan Alda and Loretta Swit, were saddened by his departure but understood his desire to pursue other opportunities. Others wondered whether he had left something extraordinary too quickly. Stevenson continued appearing on television and made guest appearances, but he never again reached the same level of success or emotional connection with audiences that he had achieved as Henry Blake. When Stevenson died in 1996 at the age of 68, fans and colleagues remembered him warmly. Alda described him as a wonderful actor and a good man, while Gary Burghoff remembered the joy and light-heartedness he brought to those around him. There is an interesting irony to Stevenson's departure. He left MASH because he wanted to find a bigger opportunity, but the role he walked away from ultimately became the most enduring part of his career. And if Stevenson's departure was dramatic, Wayne Rogers' exit was almost the complete opposite. His departure was quieter, more complicated, and filled with behind-the-scenes tension. Unlike McLean Stevenson, Wayne Rogers did not receive an elaborate farewell. One episode he was there, and then suddenly he was gone. There was no emotional goodbye, no extended explanation, and almost no closure for viewers. To understand why, we have to return to the beginning. Rogers played Trapper John McIntyre, one half of the original comedic partnership that helped define the early years of MASH. His Hawkeye Pierce formed the center of the show's original comedy, and the two characters became extremely popular with audiences. Their chemistry was one of the series' greatest strengths. Their rapid-fire jokes, mischievous behavior, and strong friendship created a dynamic that felt like a wartime version of The Odd Couple, complete with surgical humor. Rogers had reportedly joined the series believing that MASH would remain a genuine ensemble production, with the primary actors receiving relatively equal attention. As the show developed, however, more of the spotlight moved toward Alda's Hawkeye. Eventually, Hawkeye was no longer simply one of the leading characters. He became the moral center and emotional anchor of the series. Alda's increasing involvement as a writer and director also changed the creative balance. At first, Rogers reportedly had no problem with Alda's success. The two were friendly away from the cameras. But over time, Rogers began feeling that Trapper was being left behind. Hawkeye was becoming more mature and complex, while Trapper seemed trapped in the same role he had occupied from the beginning. Rogers later explained that his frustration was not really about ego. He believed the character had simply stopped having meaningful things to do. He described Trapper as someone who had gone from being one of two important friends to becoming the person who simply agreed with everything Alan said. Unlike Stevenson, Rogers chose not to make a dramatic public exit. He quietly decided not to renew his contract after Season 3. The producers reportedly did not realize how final the decision was until shortly before production on Season 4 was scheduled to begin. The situation became even stranger because Rogers' contract had apparently never been formally signed. He had been working under a handshake arrangement. When the producers threatened legal action over his departure, they discovered they had little legal ground because there was no formal contract for him to violate. Rogers simply walked away from a series he no longer believed was providing his character with room to develop. His sudden departure left the writers with a difficult problem. They had to rewrite the beginning of Season 4 and explain that Trapper John had been discharged while Hawkeye was away. Audiences were understandably confused and disappointed. Henry Blake had already been killed, and now Trapper John was gone as well. There was no farewell party, no emotional goodbye, and no final moment between Trapper and Hawkeye. Instead, the producers introduced Mike Farrell as B.J. Honeycutt. B.J. was designed to be more grounded, emotionally complex, and somewhat less rebellious than Trapper. The change immediately altered the atmosphere of the series. The buddy comedy style became softer and more reflective. Ironically, MASH continued to evolve and became even more emotionally sophisticated after Trapper's departure. While many fans still prefer the earlier seasons, the series ultimately proved that it could successfully reinvent itself. Rogers, meanwhile, continued working after leaving MASH. He appeared in television programs and films before eventually moving into a completely different field. He became a successful financial investor and commentator. Rogers had studied history at Princeton and eventually developed a successful career on Wall Street. By the 1990s, he was appearing regularly as a panelist on Fox News Cash-In, where he discussed economics and public policy. His financial success came largely through investing rather than acting. Even so, he never completely abandoned Hollywood. He appeared in several television movies, accepted recurring roles, and occasionally reflected on his time on MASH during later interviews. Despite the abrupt nature of his departure, there does not appear to have been lasting hostility between Rogers and the rest of the cast. Alan Alda continued to speak highly of him, describing him